Welcome everybody. I'm Craig Emmerich, Maria's husband, as I'm probably known more as. Today I'm going to talk about the same topic, but the title evolved as I was writing it. It's about going beyond weight loss, and I'm talking about healing. And healing, for me, involved going further towards a carnivore type of diet, and I'll talk about why that I think this really helped with my healing, and why it's good for a lot of healing conditions. So I'm going to start out by talking about plant issues. We grew up being told that we want to eat unlimited vegetables, unlimited fruits and vegetables. There's nothing negative about them. There's only positives. They're loaded with nutrients. This is the thing you want to eat all day long. This is what we grew up for decades believing, and we were being told this, and it was based on, some good information. But the more we learn and the more we understand, especially when we talk about healing people who have issues, plants aren't completely free of issues. And so if you look at plants a little bit more detail, they all have something called anti-nutrients. Anti-nutrients are compounds that our bodies have no real need for. And in fact, with a lot of them, with too much of it, can actually hurt us. And all plants have these. And it makes sense if you think of kind of an evolutionary perspective. Plants needed natural defenses, right? They're not like an animal. An animal can run away from a carnivore. A plant can't. So a plant has, over the millions of years, developed its own little defense mechanisms. And these are anti-nutrients. Many of them are basically natural pesticides. So they're compounds that when a bug or a worm or something, or bacteria tries to eat the plant, basically fights off the plant and kills it, or fights off the bug and kills it. The plant is trying to survive. To survive, it doesn't want you eating the leaves, because it's going to kill it. It doesn't want you eating the stalk, because that kills it. It doesn't want you eating the roots, because that's going to kill it. It only wants you to eat the fruit. If you eat the fruit, you spread the seeds, that's all the plant really wants you to eat. So it's built up these natural defenses, and there's thousands of these. And the vast majority of them have never really been studied in humans to understand what does this do to humans, right? Nobody's ever really looked at it. Some of them I'm going to go into, we have looked into it. But just as an example, cabbage has 49 of these anti-nutrient compounds. 49 of them. Most of them, we have no idea what they do to humans or what the toxicity levels are, none of this. So plants aren't kind of the free-for-all that we've been told they are. So the first one we're going to talk about are compounds called Glucosinolate and Sulforaphane. They come in cruciferous vegetables. So any of your bok choy, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, all the cruciferous plants have sulforaphane. Sulforaphane is used to protect the plant. It's a natural pesticide. And it doesn't sit in the field with sulforaphane in it though. This is kind of one of the interesting evolutionary perspectives that the plant has done. It's got two compartments. One has glucosinolate in it, and the other one has myosinates. These two compounds separately are fairly benign. When they're combined, if it was sitting in the field with sulforaphane on the plant, it would be killing its own cells, and the plant would be kind of killing itself. So they keeps it in separate compartments. So what happens when a bug or something eats it? It breaks those compartments open, and you make sulforaphane. And sulforaphane is a compound that can cause some issues. It can kill worms, bacteria, and insects. So again, this is a natural defense mechanism for these plants. In humans, it's not going to kill you, and we do have detoxification pathways to take care of these anti-nutrients and basically get them right back out of the body because the body doesn't want them, and there's no need for them or use for them. But they can still cause damage. You know, you can have, there's been studies that look at sulforaphane that it can inhibit certain enzymes, can poke like tiny holes in your cells and cause issues there. Potentially maybe some leaky gut type issues. You know, you start poking holes in the intestinal lining with these compounds, that could eventually lead to leaky gut. It also causes oxidation or inflammation, as any of these compounds do, because they're not something the body wants, and it's got to get rid of them. Boiling for 10 to 15 minutes, which basically is going to turn, you know, 15 minutes of a vigorous boil is going to turn any of these things to basically mush. We'll cut about half of the sulforaphane out, but you can't get rid of all of it. Another one that can be really a problem, and we actually see more and more of this these days, is something called oxalates. Oxalates are like tiny crystals that are inside the plants. And they can, damage your digestive tract. They tend to, once they get into the body, they can cause joint pain. If people, when they go carnivore or keto, if you get a sty, it's probably oxalate dumping, where it's getting the oxalates out of your body. Once you stop putting oxalates into the body pushes out the oxalates that are in it, and they start coming out in your joints or your eye. But if you get a sty, when you start going keto, that's probably why. Too much oxalate, well, before I get into that, these two pictures, that's a kiwi. So it's a microscopic image of a kiwi on the top, and then a zoom in. They look like little needles. And these, again, we have detox pathways for these, and somebody with a healthy metabolism could probably do fine if they don't exceed the amount. But they can cause irritation. The toxicity range, this is how much it takes to kill you, is 3.5 grams to 30 grams of oxalates. That's a really wide range. The reason is because it really depends on your metabolic status. If you've got leaky gut, if you've got diabetes, metabolic syndrome, Lyme disease where your immune system is depressed, you're going to be more sensitive to these. And your toxicity level might be 3.5 grams. Well, a man in Spain died from having 3 bowls of sorrel soup. And that was about 3.5 grams of oxalates. And he had diabetes. So he had a depressed, immune metabolic state, allowed him, or lowered his threshold, and he actually died. So, and another thing I want to point out, you look at some of these green smoothies, so these people, what's high in oxalates? Spinach is very high. So they make these green smoothies. It could be over 1 gram of oxalates in one of those green smoothies. So drink 3 of those a day, you've got a damaged metabolism, it could kill you. So they've been shown to disrupt normal cellular function. They also accumulate over time. If you keep having this coming into the body, they accumulate, and your body only starts pushing them out once you stop bringing them in, for the most part. Another thing that's very important, and we'll get into a little bit later, is they deplete you of minerals. Iron, magnesium, calcium. What happens is, kidney stones are often blamed on calcium. The majority of the time, they're because of oxalates. The body, when it wants to get rid of oxalates, it binds them to things like calcium. And so through the kidneys, it's trying to get rid of these oxalates, and it's binding to calcium to do it, and you get this buildup of a kidney stone. It's not the calcium's fault, it's the oxalates. And there's other minerals that it can, and we'll show in a little bit how it can deplete. But the highest levels are in spinach, Swiss chard, kale, chocolate, almonds. All nuts and seeds are high in oxalates. Peanuts, legumes, kiwi, potatoes are also very high in oxalates. Sweet potatoes as well. Now, there's no real way to reduce the amounts. They're a crystal, so cooking and whatnot, preparing, doesn't really reduce the amounts. Phytates, or phytic acid. This is another compound that comes in plants, it's an acid that's found in plants but not in animals. It prevents mineral absorption as well. And you're going to see this theme as well when we get into a little bit later about the nutrients in our food. Calcium, zinc, copper, magnesium, it can deplete you or restrict the absorption of those minerals. It's found in seeds, beans, nuts, and grains. Soaking, fermenting, and sprouting can reduce the amount of phytates in the plants. Gluco Alkaloids. This one is, you might be more familiar with nightshade. Nightshades contain Gluco Alkaloids. This is what irritates people who are sensitive to nightshades. It's the Gluco Alkaloid that's in them. It disrupts neurotransmitter signaling. It's another natural pesticide that fights off bacteria, fungus, insects. It's highest in tomatoes, eggplants, potatoes again, peppers. Potatoes are probably the worst for this. They have, the FDA has a maximum amount of glycoalkaloids that are allowed to be in potatoes. If they're above that, they can't be sold. And the toxicity levels anywhere from 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight to 3 milligrams. Again, kind of a wide range. I think it depends on your metabolic state. If you have an autoimmune condition or something that you're depressing your immune system and your metabolism, you're going to be on the lower side. And for reference, one of the little 1 ounce bags of potato chips has anywhere from 2.7 milligrams to 12 milligrams of glucoalkaloids. So you start talking about a little kid, and if he eats two or three bags of those, you're starting to get to the toxicity level. Modern produce. So this is so we covered, plants aren't this perfect panacea that are made out to be, that vegetables should be unlimited. So let's talk a bit about what our modern produce looks like today versus the way it used to look. The paleo diet is kind of, I don't know what you call it, oxymoron or contradictory, that nothing in the grocery store today looks like what our paleo ancestors ate. So you can't really eat a paleo diet anymore. It's because modern produce has been hybridized and modified in just the last couple hundred years to look vastly different than anything our paleo ancestors ate. For example, the modern tomato. It used to be this little berry-sized thing. After a bunch of experiments in about 1840, we got the modern tomato. And it was actually in Mexico, not Italy, like you might think. But in the United States, it was like in the 1910s before we started using what's a modern tomato today. Strawberry, 1803. It used to be this tiny thing, and now they've hybridized it to be what we all know today. The second component of it is the seasonality. So not only have we greatly changed the way our fruit looks and what it's made out of, you get it all year long now. That didn't used to be the case for the majority of things. Fresh produce, within the last 100 years or so, if you think about canning was invented in 1810, didn't really get used in America till about 1913. Frozen produce started in the 1930s, and then now we have fresh produce year round through different farming techniques and whatnot. So it didn't used to be available all the time. So let's look at a couple examples of this. The watermelon. Everybody knows what a watermelon looks like on the right. Well, it didn't used to look like that. It used to be a lot of rind, a lot of seeds. It's about 80% water, 1.9% sugar. Today, 3.3 times as sweet. That's a pretty common theme here, is that we have hybridized things to be sweeter, higher in sugar, higher in carbs, higher in starch, while by calorie getting less and less nutrients. So there's about 1,200 varieties today where there used to be just a couple. Carrot. That's what a carrot used to look like. I don't think anybody would want to eat that. it was about the 10th century where they started farming it and then making the hybridization process to get what we have today. It's much sweeter and, of course, grown year-round. Corn. This one is, probably everybody in this room with corn syrup and the whole, everything that's evolved from this. It used to be kind of this grass with some seeds on it. You look at it, it was only 3/4 of an inch long. So you're talking about that long with a couple of seeds on it. It's now 1,000 times bigger. And it's got 3.5 times as much sugar. So they're taking these plants, they're hybridizing them, they find one that just happens to, for some reason, grow bigger than all the other ones. So they grab that gene and then they start making more of that. That one, they get a freak one that's bigger than all the rest, they grab that one and then it keeps going until you get bigger and bigger and bigger. More and more sugar, less and less nutrients. Strawberries. This is actually our picture on the side. That's a wild strawberry we found at Maria's parents' cabin. Little tiny thing, very tart and sweet. About 1/5 of an inch, so pretty small. And it was only in 1806 where they started hybridizing to get what we see in the stores now today, and it's huge. You get these strawberries that are massive, full of sugar, and of course, growing year-round. Get fresh strawberries in the summer or in the winter. And this is still happening today, so this is not a trend that's going to go away. You are constantly seeing new things coming out that are hybridized even further. Example, there's a sugar bee apple now that started with a Honeycrisp, which is already hybridized to be sweeter, to be even sweeter than Honeycrisp. Cotton candy grapes. This one is, to me, is just quite the example of this. We went from 100 calories, we went from 62 calories and 15 grams of sugar in the already hybridized grape, which was sweeter than they ever were, and we almost doubled the sugar. 100 calories and 28 grams of sugar. So they doubled the sugar in the grapes. It's going to keep happening. We're going to see this more and more. And, in the past few years, the amount of change in our produce is just not natural for, our bodies. This isn't paleo eating. This is something completely different. So that's kind of plants. So we're talking about carnivore, right? So let's get into that side of things, or how this can heal people's bodies when they have issues. Let's talk about our human design. There's a few studies like this that are really interesting that look at the isotopic values of the bone collagen in some of our ancestors. So they looked at Neanderthals as well as early human ancestors. They look at the collagen and they look at the amount of nitrogen, and from that they can determine what their diet primarily consisted of, how much protein. So these nitrogen values can show you how much compared to other animals of that time of their diet came from protein, animal proteins. And you could also, based on the nitrogen content, kind of tell what animals they were eating. So you'll see here that on the top left guy standing there, that's Neanderthals. And the top right guy is the early human ancestors. Below them, the higher you go, the more animal proteins they ate. Below them is a hyena, and a lion, and a wolf. These early humans did one thing primarily the vast majority of the time, and it was eat large animals. And this is only 30,000 years ago. It's not that long ago. So if you look at, where we've come from that state, we've gone a long way from it. They broke it down into the nitrogen content, what they were primarily eating. Woolly mammoths, large mammals. And so they were, hunting, killing these very large animals. I mean, these woolly mammoths were massive animals. They would eat for months on these things. And that was a primary diet, as well as some reindeer, rhinos, other mammals, large mammals primarily. So this is reflected in our digestive tract today. We as humans, if you compare us to other primates, we have two distinct differences. You see all the other primates are fairly similar in their digestive tract composition. Their gut part by species there. Stomach is similar for all of them. Small intestine, we have twice as long as other primates. What's the small intestine great for? Digesting nutrient-dense animal foods or already cooked vegetables. Cecum was much smaller in us as well, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. And the colon. So the colon is good for digesting that hard to digest plant matter. The human colon is less than half the length of other primates. So what happened 30,000 years ago when these early humans came about? They developed these larger and larger brains, which enabled them to hunt and make tools and hunt large prey. But that created a compromise because our brains are energy hogs. You look at the brain compared to the rest of the body, it needs a ton of energy and nutrient-dense foods. What's the most nutrient-dense food? Animal protein. And so they evolved to be, it was a compromise of, shrinking the gut to grow the brain that had to be made to evolve into what we are today. So this requires much more nutrient-dense foods. Another example is our stomach pH. If you look at different species, herbivores, primarily that eat only plants, they have a stomach acidity of about 5 to 6. That's for digesting plant matter. Omnivores, which eat both plants and meat, they're about 3 to 4. Carnivores, like wolves and lions, their stomach pH is about 2 to 3. Humans, if you went and got yours tested right now, it's typically about 1 to 2, most of the time 1.5 to 2. So what's that telling you? It's primarily designed to be based on animal proteins. And even more so, this going back to the previous slides on what our ancestors ate, this points to how you kill a woolly mammoth, you've got to eat off of that for a long time. The very, very acidic stomach environment of humans can handle the meat as it's, maybe been sitting around for a longer period of time. And so, even compared to like a hyena, we have a very acidic stomach because we needed to process these things after they've been around for a while. So we have a very acidic stomach, even more so than carnivores. Let's put all this into a kind of a timeline and understand what we're talking about here for reference. I won't even go back to 2 million years ago when you talk about like Lucy and the early ancestors. Let's just focus on the time from like the early human ancestors 30,000 years ago. So that's about right there. I tried to put this to scale as much as I could. They lived 30 to 50,000 years ago. 50,000 more like the Neanderthals, 30,000 is our early human ancestors. So where does, that's today, so let's call that 2019. Agriculture, farming, starts about 7,000 years ago. So that's not that long ago compared to when you look at how carnivorous our ancestors were. Then right there, hybridization of produce began, which, again, a couple hundred years ago. It's not that long ago on the timeline here. You start adding things like year-round availability of produce, you can hardly tell the difference. Just maybe 100 years ago. And then in the last 50, 60 years, the millions of food additives and food dyes and all these chemicals that we're putting in our food, it almost lines up there because it's only been about 50 years ago. So if you look at our existence, we are, if you, the last little group there in the last 150 years or so, we've drastically changed what we're eating. And I don't think it's good. I don't think our bodies are designed to eat primarily vegetables. Now let's go back to the cecum. So the human cecum is this kind of pouch, or any animal's cecum, is a pouch where you take the hard to digest plant materials like fiber, and you ferment them, and they sit in there, and they ferment and turn into saturated fatty acids and are used by the animal. On the rightmost there is a koala bear. See that cecum, the reddish, big, twirly circle? That's what an herbivore looks like. This big, long pouch where stuff sits, that fiber sits to be fermented into fatty acids. Wolf is the one in the middle, that little tiny pocket right there. That's a wolf's cecum. Human, it's a little hard to see here. Let me point it. That's it right there, right at the beginning of the colon. So it's just a tiny pouch. That's why we can't really digest fiber. Fiber goes through us, doesn't get processed, because we have a tiny cecum. So what happens when you change your diet to one extreme or the other? This is a really interesting study, and I really enjoyed reading this. It shows us a lot about our gut flora. I think today we still have so little understanding of our gut flora and what it does and how it's affected by our diets and different things. You know, that's one of the things about keto or carnivore. People criticize saying, you know, your gut flora is going to be trash and you're going to have all kinds of digestive issues. Well, this study was really good. It was well designed, controlled, randomized controlled trial, and they took two groups of people, all eating standard American diet. One group, 100% vegetarian. The other group, 100% carnivore. And it was real carnivore. It was well designed. It's not soybean oil or some of these studies that use a bunch of junk. You'll see, I wish I could point, the green area was the switching of the diet. And you can see that the left side is the plant-based and the right side animal-based. You can see on, these are different strains of diversity of gut flora. And you'll see that within 24 hours, in either case, the gut flora drastically changes in the amount of microbes for different microbes. But the type of microbes doesn't really change that much. So you still have all the same microbes. It's just within 24 hours of doing only meat versus 24 hours of doing only vegetarian, they shift in amounts. So it makes a lot of sense, right? There's certain microbes that are really good at digesting plant matter, they're gonna increase in their amount of those. The ones that are good for digesting meats, you're gonna get more of those because there's more meat around. But what's interesting is how quickly it shifts. And within 24 hours of that hitting the gut, your whole microbiome shifts drastically. It's a very flexible system. And as a note here, you know, if you're eating carnivore, you're not eating anything to feed the gut flora, right? That's not true. This chart shows fermentables, so the different substrates, how fermentable they are. The highest is fructooligosaccharides, FOS. That's found in small amounts in certain plants. But what's the next highest? Collagen and casein and cellulose, which is plant fiber that people think that you need more of this to feed your gut flora, is 1.5, but chicken cartilage 5.5, glucosamine 7.1. There's a lot of animal fermentables, right? And as shown in the center chart there, you're feeding those gut microbes, the ones at least that you need to process the meat. And then over time, so another criticism will be, well, sure, it changes fast, but if you don't eat any grains or fiber for a long period of time, 5 years, whatever, that you're going to lose those microbes. There's been a few carnivores that have tested their fecal matter, and they still have all the same strains. Again, they're shifted. Ones are certain ones are much more prevalent, certain ones are much less prevalent, but they're all still there. And so I don't think the long-term damage is really an issue if you want to switch back to some other lifestyle. Myself, I haven't eaten gluten in, 15 years. Does that mean my bacteria that are good at digesting gluten are gone, maybe? I don't know. But I'm never going to eat gluten again, so I don't really care. So what other changes happen in this study when you shift these diets? They looked at some gene expression in both groups as well, which is really kind of interesting. One of the things that drastically changed, the plant-based, almost no change, animal-based, huge change in the genes that are responsible for vitamin biosynthesis. A huge increase in the genes responsible for synthesizing vitamins. Why could that be happening? Well, maybe if we look at where our nutrients are coming from in our diet, it'll tell us. Well, if you look at fruits and vegetables against animal products for nutrients, you'll see that animal products have way more nutrient density than any fruits or vegetables. This kind of goes back to the original myth in the beginning of endless fruits and vegetables because they're so dense in nutrients and there's no negatives. Well, if you really want something that's dense in nutrients, eat some beef liver. Yeah. And even without that, beef by itself kind of beats up all of these fruits and vegetables as well. Real superfood, you always hear about the superfood, acai berries, or if you look at the nutrient breakdown of those superfoods, they're high in one thing, vitamin C, nothing, almost zeros everywhere else. So let's look at other animal proteins. So, if you're doing primarily a carnivorous diet, are you getting a wide range of things? And I think you are. And you look at these, you start, if you have some salmon, and of course you're picking up a bunch of vitamin D, you're getting omega-3s, eggs, you're gonna get some extra calcium, pork, you're gonna get a little boost in potassium, chicken, you get extra magnesium. So, looking at it from that perspective, you're getting a wide, balanced array of vitamins and minerals. What about fats? So, a lot of people talk about this as a low-carb, high-fat lifestyle. The high fat doesn't necessarily have to come from the diet, especially if you're trying to lose weight. That you want the extra body fat coming from your body to be used as fuel. And this kind of shows that as beef tallow or lard, the fat by itself has very little nutrients. It's energy. Of course, you need it in a keto lifestyle for your energy. But things like bulletproof coffee is just empty calories. You're just getting a bunch of calories with very little nutrients. So always chew your food and focus on whole foods to get all those nutrients your body needs, especially when you're talking about healing. Because when you're talking about healing from a chronic condition, you need lots of vitamins and minerals for those cells to heal. And if you're drinking bulletproof coffee, you're just not helping in the situation. So some of you might be saying, well, I don't know about beef liver. Well, we have ways to, or other organ meats, which all organ meats are really good, by the way. You can, first of all, you can get it in your diet without even really knowing it too much. If you mix about 5 pounds of ground beef with 1 pound of ground liver, it makes a really good hamburger, and you won't really notice the liver in there. We also, you can also chop it up into little bits, freeze it, and just pop it like a pill. It's nature's multivitamin, right? Swallow it. But if you look at beef by itself, it does a pretty good job. This is just beef against kale, which is supposed to be this superfood, right? Beef is number 1 in 13 out of 15 vitamins and minerals. And number 2 in 2 of them. So you're getting the most nutrient-dense food when you focus on the animal proteins. And that's so important for healing. So let's talk a little bit back to the plants versus for nutrient absorption. This goes back to kind of the anti-nutrients and how things like oxalates can deplete you of certain nutrients. This study here showed it in drastic detail. Oysters are a wonderful source of zinc. You want zinc, so if you like oysters, it's a great way to get it in. The top line is the absorption of zinc in the blood plasma after eating just oysters, the top line. The next line is oysters with black beans. Look, a third of the zinc gets absorbed into the body. And the bottom line is oysters with corn tortillas. No zinc gets absorbed. And so this is why, you know, I get a little frustrated with people who focus on nutrient density but don't focus on bioavailability. Because, you know, like spinach, yeah, tons of nutrients in there. People say, you know, you need calcium, get more spinach. Well, guess what? Most of that calcium is locked up in oxalates. And it's not going to be used by the body. Where if you eat eggs, the bioavailability is through the roof. So other examples of this, again, spinach, most of that calcium is locked up. You can't use it. Meat, iron absorption is about 85%. Legumes, iron absorption, 0.84%. So saying these certain foods are so nutrient dense, you need more of them in your diet, ignores the fact that you're not really getting any of it in the body. Just because it's in the food doesn't mean it gets into your body and is absorbed. These anti-nutrients can rob you of absorbing those things. So what does this look like? Carnivore we defined as 4 different levels. And this is getting into what we call, what we coined as the carnivore autoimmune protocol. If you've got something you're trying to heal from, like an autoimmune disease, Lyme disease, chronic conditions that you're trying to reverse your health on, we have people go right to level 1, which is just beef and salt. So you're just eating that most nutrient-dense food, that's the most bioavailable nutrient-dense food, beef, from our previous charts. Then you can maybe progress to see how your body reacts to like a level 2, which is all animal proteins and salt. So you're talking about, you know, beef, pork, poultry, fish, and you can kind of, that chart we had, you can expand a bit to pick up these other nutrients if your body's okay with those proteins. Some people might have a little issue with something like pork or different things, so you kind of try it out one by one. Level 3 is all animal proteins plus eggs and dairy. So now you're adding in one at a time. We recommend especially dairy, because dairy is a common allergen, more common than gluten. So you add one at a time, see how your body reacts after a week or so. And level 4 is kind of what we probably call more like zero carb versus carnivore, because you're actually adding some plants, like spices and maybe sauces like ranch, or zero sugar sauces like ranch or mustard or something. That's really more zero carb than carnivore. But this is how you can kind of go through it and find what it's really, when you talk about autoimmune diseases, it's really kind of the ultimate elimination diet. You're figuring out what things have messed up caused this autoimmune response, which foods have caused it, eliminating them, and then bringing things back in while you're healing your body with this most nutrient-dense food. And that's what I described here, which our book is coming end of this year. This is a really great way to heal your body from a lot of conditions. I've used it to help with my Lyme disease. I am an order of magnitude better than I was here last year because of eating carnivore primarily. With Lyme disease, you have a lot of migrating pain, and that is completely gone when I eat carnivore. But we detail all that in our book. Weight loss, carnivore can be great for weight loss as well. I'm going to kind of skip over these because Maria's going to go into much more detail in her session on oxidative priority. But if you look at it, what are you doing when you're eating carnivore? You're cutting out all the alcohol, all the exogenous ketones, you're cutting out all the carbs, getting a good amount of protein and all the nutrients, and just the fat that's coming with the protein. So this allows you to use more of your body fat for fuel. And our book's coming in October, as I mentioned, and we also have a lot of services. We have some cards here if you're interested in some of our courses or subscription support programs. That's it.